Great that you're here. So we'd like to have a little chat about, of course, visual facilitation, but maybe first it would be great or would be good if you could introduce yourselves a little bit. So maybe, Charles-Louis, if we start with you. So who are you? Where you're from? How would you describe what it is that you do?
Thanks, Frank. So I'm Charles-Louis de Maere from Belgium. Proud father of 3 kids, well, 2 teenage daughters and a son that's not yet there. So that's good. How do I best describe what I do? I would say that I focus on making the world a better place while being aware of where I can, like switch or adapt things. I can't change whole governments. Like in Belgium, it takes ages to form a new one anyway. So it's more like coming close to the area, talking with people, seeing like how they interact with one another. I've got an IT background, so I've started with Agile, Scrum, and now I'm also more and more interested into the many ways that people can work together, be it through collaborative workshops, collective intelligence, visualizing. I'm also an integral coach, which means that I can also do like individual coaching programs. Yeah.
Basically, you have a passion for board games, right?
Yes, I do. I think there's even a few ones here behind me, but yeah, I always have some board games close to me. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And comes down to the same thing, like talking to people and having some great experiences with them.
Thanks. Happy to have you, Charles-Louis. Andy, if you would introduce yourself quickly.
Yeah, so I'm Andy, work with Work Visible, and so we mostly deal in helping organizations change, transformations of various kinds, and after doing that for years in a kind of more traditional sense, we've got a slightly quirky way of doing that, which uses visual thinking and engages large groups of people in something we call change by adventure. We also do like bespoke workshops and so on, and of course bikablo training, and we do some graphic recording and this type of thing as well.
And you're based in?
We're based in Scotland, and we work in kind of UK, Ireland, and a bit of Europe.
Fantastic, thank you. Koen, how about you?
Hey, Koen from Belgium. Also proud father of 2 kids, 2 sons, and I like having fun in life. So I'm basically two hats. On the one hand, I'm an enterprise lean agile coach and trainer, and on the other hand, I founded my own company, Visuals, 2 years ago, dealing with all kind of visualization stuff, because I got very much triggered in how people communicate with each other, but don't make impact. So for me, visualization is a way of having people working together in another way like we traditionally do, and creating a kind of magic impact. Having people telling their own stories.
Great.
Voilà.
Thanks to have you, or happy to have you. Thank you. So I'll also talk a little bit about myself. I'm Frank, based out of Germany, and I thought gathering the 3 of you would be great because I think we all sort of work or have backgrounds in the same area. So my background is in Lean and Six Sigma business transformation. But now I also work a lot with bikablo. Sort of am the contact person for the global trainer team. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussion to see, how do visuals have an impact working, especially with groups. But maybe before we dive into a group discussion, Charles-Louis, when did you join bikablo, and what is it that you do in your day job? Like, if you would describe a typical day, what would that be like, if there is a typical day, really?
So 2 questions into one. So I joined bikablo. I think my first connection with bikablo was by seeing the books and trying to reproduce whatever. So as a Scrum Master, to me, it kind of answers both questions at the same time. I kind of wanted to make things visible. I heard about information radiators, so I always try to add some icons or pictograms to whatever workshops that we were doing. And then I went to a bikablo training in Germany. It was funny because it was already in March and suddenly I had a huge snowstorm while going there. But anyway, so I really enjoyed the training, and then I started using it as a trainer, keeping some important concepts on a poster, because I thought, okay, I'm not going to redo all my slides on visuals, but I can keep some key things on posters. And after a while, what I noticed is that I arrived maybe an hour or so before the end of the training, and I noticed that I spent half of my time next to the poster and that I still had loads of slides to do. But when I looked at the slides, everything had already been said just by discussing, by conversing around the poster. So I found that there was another dynamic by using these visuals, because people could, for one, they could remember better. Secondly, the 3 or 4 posters that I had were always visible, whereas with slides, I always had the trouble of finding back the exact slide where we were talking about. So that was one thing. As a trainer, it has helped me focus more the conversations and be more adaptable to whatever the audience needs. And also as a workshop facilitator, well, there's different ways that I use it. A few easy things is, of course, like creating the instructions for the workshop so that I don't have to repeat it all the time. What is it that we need to do after this and this and that? People can see it. But also taking all the outcomes of the conversations or all the outcomes of whatever panel discussion that there is as a way of capturing the results so that the team can afterwards take it into their team room and then they can do something with it. So a bit like Koen was saying about having some impact and do something about it.
Okay, thank you. And Andy, when or how did you join the Global bikablo Trainer team? And if there was a typical day in your life using visuals, what would that look like?
Thank you. Well, I mean, so I was thinking about it. So it was, I mean, for years I've used kind of drawing as part of facilitating groups and this type of thing. And I was working with some good friends, and one of them said, "Hey, why don't you come along to this bikablo thing in London? Said you'll love it." And I thought it was, it's 2 days of drawing, and Frank's amazing, and it'll be a lot of fun. So so I went along, and actually, without any expectations other than how fantastic I'm going to spend 2 days drawing, and I never get the chance to do that. And that was, I think, sometime early 2017, and it was great, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I could see how it was applicable. And then we caught up afterwards, Frank, about, hey, maybe I can train this. And in fact, at the time, I had a visual thinking course that was half built. So I was looking at doing something similar, and I thought, well, here's one that's pre-built, and it makes a lot of sense. So around early 2018, I think I came on the Global Trainer in Cologne, and been loving it since then. So I suppose what's a typical day? So I'll find myself doing probably one of 4 things. So either facilitating workshops very often with very large groups, as in 50 plus, or working with smaller groups or individuals to try and help them kind of build momentum and get change going, or be in a training setting, or else doing remote work. So do a lot of remote work and use online tools to facilitate that as well. Because we'll come and do some intensive work, and then come away and do work and support them remotely, and then come back and challenge them again.
That sounds very interesting.
So and doing that, so the visual side of it, it's really so important, because we find it as a way of getting to people to really connect with the challenge, to get on the same page about what they want to do, to get on the same page about what's important out of all of that. Giving people a shared picture to have that discussion around, we find like 10 times more powerful than just kind of meandering discussions or whatever. This idea of creating an artifact that people can use to talk around is really super powerful. So that's kind of the single thing that kind of goes through all of our work is using visuals as a kind of mirror for where people are, and also as a kind of catalyst for getting them to kind of build some momentum and do something.
Yeah. Great, thanks. I would like to touch on a couple of things that you said afterwards, but let's hear first about Koen. So Koen, when did you join the Global Trainer team, and if there is a typical day, how would you describe a typical day?
Well, in 2017, I was working for ING as a coach, and all of a sudden, one of the managers asked me to create a visualization training for the people internally. So I did. There was a big opportunity, and while I was looking for information to build my own, which was very successful at that time, when I was, yeah, it's
Of
true.
course.
An internal company, yeah, it's always successful. I was digging into information. I touched upon bikablo again. So I sent a mail to the headquarters to ask them whether they were looking for trainers. But at that time, they were only focusing on the German market. So I think 6 months later, I got an email asking whether I was still interested. And then, yeah, the next the next thing is history. That's how I joined. So late 2017, I joined the bikablo community. So what I'm doing in my daily life, as I told you, I'm wearing two hats. So as a coach and trainer, I'm using the visualizations, and I have an anecdote about that, but I will come back on this later. On the other hand, as a visualizer, I help in trainers to become better trainers, not really on the content, but in the way they bring stuff on the scene. I'm pretty much involved in dealing with leadership, draw the way they lead, draw the way they tell a story to the audience in change tracks. And on the floor, sometimes it's hard to get a message to the floor. So sometimes I'm drawing a learning poster to tell the story or to enable people to bring a story. Or I draw sales pitches to enable Salesforce to bring the sales talk to the prospects. And currently, I'm working on together with two people on two different books related to agile way of working. And I'm doing a little bit of the, how can I say it? The visualization or the illustrations. So, and to come back on the anecdote, over time, I was always walking around with this kind of plastic tube where I put my drawings in to have always my most important posters with me. So, and I found out that it became a kind of brand, because when I entered at clients' offices and I was not wearing the tube, they started to ask me where was my tube.
Yeah,
so that works kind of brand. Works well.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I remember at one of the clients that I started using visual facilitation, I think back in 2015, 2016, it was also always posters for workshops where it was more like ground rules during a workshop that I visualized that after the workshop, people came, hey, my colleagues really like that poster. Can you draw it again? And I saw myself copying the same poster 5 times before we then agreed that we would just scan it and then plot it, once people needed it. But I guess it's this thing within an organization where people start seeing things, because again, visualization is about seeing things, making things tangible. And then they start probably thinking about how could they use it? Because of course, if it looks nice, there is lots of eye candy to it. People are attracted to it. So I heard a lot of different things that you said in how you actually use it in your daily life. For Koen, it's a lot about also storylines. How can you convey a story using visuals? And I think, Andy, you said something like also having something tangible. That's what I love. Once you put something on paper, it's discussable rather than rather than a white piece of paper, because
exactly.
It's just, and it doesn't matter what it looks like, but at least you put something on paper and then you can start discussing it. Or Charles-Louis, like you said, in workshops, so that they have what's the right term? Anyway, they have something that they can grab and they can take it with them, right? There is a specific term for it. It will come back to me. So
can
go
I
ahead,
still add one more anecdote? So at my time at ING, when we were giving trainings, we pushed out PowerPoint. So we did the entire talk based on flip charts, and then we just put every flip chart on the wall. So it was a 2 days training, and we put every flip chart on the wall just as an experiment. And after day 1 or at the start of day 2, normally you do the wrap up, and it's the trainer that does the wrap up. And this time we just as an experiment, we asked somebody from the audience to do the wrap up. And that was really amazing. 99% of the talk was just coming back just because they stand up on the wall and they just used the flip charts to repeat the story. So at that time, we started to do it over and over as the experiment, just to check whether it was an assumption or it was really the case. And every time again, there was such a big difference between the wrapping up using the posters done by the audience, or it was just people falling asleep while you do the wrap up of yesterday using a PowerPoint.
Have you made similar experiences, Charles-Louis, Andy?
Well, I had some similar experiences. We also did a completely slides-free training. And even I remember one particular instance, we had it was a 3-day training where we had people. So usually we did a training with the team we were working with, and also invited all their satellites, because we talk about changing the way of working, everyone's impacted. Okay, so we had people who had sometimes never seen them, each other in real life. So we had this training with all the posters that they had made, some that we had created on the walls. And one particular instances, it was we had rented a room in a hotel for that. And when we came in on day 3, the cleaning crew had completely cleaned the room.
Oh God.
I mean, I was really amazed. No, amazed is not the best word. I was moved.
How tiny they are. You were really amazed how tiny they are.
The thing that surprised me the most was the shock on the participants' face when they came back in the room.
Oh.
It was really like everything's gone. So
that's interesting.
It became really like something, a kind of emotional link, and I can relate to what Koen is saying about being able to better remember when you create a poster and when you come back to it. But imagine coming back to a session like that, a workshop, and then everything is gone. And we went to the cleaning crew, and we went to the hotel. Oh no, it's been done yesterday evening. It's already recycled, whatever. Here's some fresh paper for you. And they completely missed the point.
But I had the same experience. I mean, so although with myself, it was one of these rooms where it's just white walls everywhere that you can draw on. So the whiteboard paint. And so we'd covered the entire, all 4 walls, and it was a big room. And we came in over 2 days, and it was all there. And the cleaners just cleaned it overnight at the end of. So we came in day 3, and there was nothing. And same reaction, right? It's all gone. And the shock of that. And there's something intriguing to me about that, how creating the pictures can really change the atmosphere. It's you changing the environment that people are in, and it's a compelling thing. And I can relate to what you're saying, Koen, and that's a fantastic. I love the example of doing the training and just having it all out on the walls, and it ties up really closely with some feedback that I had from one of my clients. So it was just from time to time we'll follow up, and we'll kind of get in touch with people and say, well, how are you getting on? After the fact, just to kind of check in with them. And so this was with a global company, and they were involved in, so it was a group of architects, and they were doing global transformation. Isn't everyone these days? And so but what they were saying is, old worlds, before they were using visualization, what they would do is they would have a deck, and they would go through the deck, and that would take about 20, 25 minutes. And then they would have conversations about these pretty complex topics that they were having to sort out, so that they could figure out what they wanted to do in that locale with the architecture, whatever. And so they went from that to spending time beforehand to create posters that encapsulated the whole topic. And so they said there was 2 effects of that, which were really obvious. So one was the time it took them to get from arriving to having people understand and be having useful conversations about what to do next reduced dramatically. So instead of it being like 20, 25 minutes, they were into conversations that mattered within 5 to 10 minutes. You know, and if you scale it up across the organization from a communication point of view, that's a lot of time. But it wasn't just faster to get to conversations that mattered. They were having better conversations where they were actually able to, so that the understanding was more commonly shared. They were having kind of more insightful dialogue. And one of the things that, and I think this ties directly back to the stuff that you're saying, Koen, is the fact that because you're seeing everything at once, you don't have this experience of having to, in a linear way, almost kind of store away the content in your brain. So you're going through the slides and it's like, oh, I must remember that thing of slide 3. You get to slide 103 and like, that's long gone. And you're like, you're brain dead by that time.
Yes.
Whereas having the picture, people can take in the whole picture at once and they make the connections as people are talking. And
they're really in the middle of the entire story. And what to me works so magic, what's creating magic is, and that's something I learned from Martin, like you're bringing a visual story, it's there, and then the discussion starts, and then he was really mapping feedback and conclusions directly on the posters. So you get not only the story, you map out also the feedback and the discussions on the spot where the people are there, and it's linked to where in the story the discussion took place. So that's really, for me, it's really magic.
There are a couple of things that I really like about that example. Number one is, and I just recently read this in a book, that the spatial memory for us works a lot better than short-term memory in terms of somebody tells you something. Yeah. So I guess if all the posters are in the room, at least you would know where to look, you know, in terms of like, yeah, I remember that was a topic that was there, or that was a topic that was there. And I always ask myself, if you have a slide deck, I mean, you could also just have all the slides printed out, you know, on a flip chart and flip them over. Then I think it wouldn't make any difference. I think the visual facilitation part of it makes a difference of using flip charts, because I also think PowerPoint is a great tool, you know, if you use it correctly. So I'm not against PowerPoint at all. I just think if you use flip charts the right way, maybe even, you know, in conjunction with PowerPoint, it can be very, very powerful. But I was always wondering, I mean, you could also hand out a slide deck printed to people so they could look it up, but I think it's not the same thing. I think there is a huge difference to it, because probably also when it's all printed, maybe, you know, you have an assumption it's all there, or you don't make notes. I don't know. I was always wondering about that. What do you think?
I think it's not the point. I mean, I think it's not the point. You know, handing out a slide deck or having the slides or whatever, to me, when I imagine PowerPoint or even the presentation that we had like in the past with a projector or something like that, you know, on these plastic things, the thing is, it's just, overhead projectors. Yes, I can still remember those. So these things are actually just like a book, which means that they have a certain sequence, and it's the trainer that kind of decided on whatever sequence they have. Now, if we hang posters in a room, well, for one part of the people that follow the training, they make certain connections in a certain way, but for the others, they can make other connections. And so everyone will be able to integrate the knowledge based on how their own brain works, not based on the way the trainer's brain works. Plus, you've got this extra flexibility of being able to use the 2 dimensions of the wall. You don't have to put everything next to it. You can put things on top, underneath, so you can use the whole dimension. Whereas on a screen, actually, you only have one window that you can maybe move about, but it's not the same as capturing everything in. You know, like you can zoom out or zoom in on the screen. But having everything at once and focusing on part of the drawing is not the same.
No. What I like about this as well is that usually the participants are part of the creation process. You know, it doesn't matter if it's a training or if it's a workshop, but they're part of the creation process rather than something is just presented to them. I think that's also makes a huge difference.
And it creates another dynamic, because when, you know, and I would see in traditional training, when we ask for expectations at the beginning of the training, and then we give a training, and at the end of the training, we check on the expectations. I'm not saying this is a bad way of doing it, because it's better to do that. The thing is, if you do it at the end of the training, there's not much room to adapt it. Mm-hmm. Now, if we integrate the expectations in the visuals, we can always revert back to them and say, okay, you know, based on the direction we're taking, are we taking care of this?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So where do you see the biggest challenges in using visuals in your day-to-day work? Like, where are you facing challenges? I mean, I know, you know, Koen said, for example, you know, the training was great, and, you know, where's the pipe on your back? And, you know, people typically really enjoy what we're doing. At least it's my experience. But have you ever, like, in which environment may it be difficult, or have you faced some obstacles, I mean, you know, and how do you deal with them, Andy?
There's a pretty obvious one, which is just around how office environments are set up these days. So we've got this kind of meeting paradigm, which is, let's all sit around the table and read a document, you know, and that was fine, you know, maybe 50 years ago. But so a lot of the times you go to venues now, and actually they're just not set up to accommodate this type of work. So I had a scenario last year where it was a strategic offsite. I was doing the facilitation and so on. And we were kind of brought in a little bit late. And so I said, well, just like rule of thumb, get a space that's at least double the size you would normally, and make sure we've got space to move around and wall space. And they couldn't really accommodate that. And we had this like boardroom set up with a fancy fireplace and fancy pictures on the walls. No space to do anything. Like you could hardly squeeze past the chairs. Mm-hmm. And I think that's quite a common experience where it's, you know, space to hang things and lay things out and work in a spatial and a visual way is sometimes quite cramped. So I come across that quite a bit. And the other one would be, so that just means you've got to be a bit organized beforehand, right? And then the other one would be working digitally. So I do quite a lot of remote work. So experimenting with that and using online whiteboards and so on. And, you know, you can use templates quite easily, but getting people actively hands-on with the drawing, there's kind of a barrier there, which is an interesting one as well, which is, you know, it's quite fun, but, you know, it needs a bit of work.
If I didn't see the room where I'm going, then I take all my material with me. So I'm looking like a donkey coming in with all this material, but...
And next time the clients will ask, hey, Koen, where's the donkey?
Yeah, I know. That's how it goes.
I think that's really important, because as a visualizer, if people expect me to produce visuals, I want to have good material, and I know I can trust my own. I've had some instances where I ask, okay, what kind of material do you have? Oh yeah, we have flip chart stands, we have paper and so on. But then the flip chart stands are broken because they haven't been used in 57 years, or the paper is like this half-used, half-recycled paper, or quite small. I even had an instance when I gave the training in Montreal with Jill, where we kind of booked flip chart stand on a venue that we booked online. But the thing was, it was just a kind of an easel. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was no hard back. Oh, so if we put the paper on it, we didn't have like the hard back to work on it. So it was like useless, and we paid to rent that thing. And so this is like something which is, and to relate back on the digital thing, most companies I work with now are saying, oh, now we're going digital, whatever. And so finding a flip chart stand in these companies is sometimes like really maybe one or two. Yes. And you need to know where it is in the two towers that are like 30 floors high. You really need to know where they are.
Yeah, I think you're touching on a couple of things. Number one is that, I mean, in Germany, I think we're spoiled because all of us have, you know, the pin boards and flip charts and everything. And then your assumption is that, of course, everywhere else it's the same thing, which, of course, you know, it is not. And I remember I used to work for Xerox for a very long time. And when the digital whiteboards came out, that must have been like the 2000s, early 2000s, where you still had like 4 markers, like 4 different colors, and you had to connect using a USB. I remember that they replaced all of so there were no flip charts anymore, and you just had these boards, but nobody knew how to use them. So I think technology actually was a barrier. And I'm wondering if that's the case these days as well. So a lot of organizations provide, let's say, an iPad Pro or a Surface or some other laptop that has a touch screen and even a stylus with it. But the employees don't really know how to use it. Just like with Microsoft Word, you only used 15% of all the options. So I'm really wondering if there is a huge gap and if there is a missed opportunity, in order, like, how could we leverage that technology?
Well, I mean, I would say I think there's a couple of things there. I think one, there absolutely is, but I think on the flip side, there's also a thing where very little skill is needed. So quite often we do really informal stuff around visualizing. So we're literally, with no training, with nothing, we'll just ask people to draw a picture of their current situation. Mm-hmm. And then we'll take a short video of them explaining it. And generally it's hilarious. We spend the rest of our time laughing. but actually just, the ability to draw a stick figure or a boxed in a line or like a kid's house is kind of all that you need. So in that kind of scenario, it's not a barrier. But then to do things that are a bit more kind of structured and kind of make more sense, then I think it absolutely is. I think there's another side of it which I've observed in the trainings and in the facilitation, which is interesting when it comes to technology. There's something very simple about just coming back to pen and paper. Everyone's used to being in their screen, having these things and all the rest of it, and the kind of the immediacy of saying, well, draw what that looks like, or getting them, and actually the effect in the trainings I've noticed of people standing, it's a very different feeling physically from being like this at the desk.
Yes.
Being like this at the desk. And I think, we get a lot of really positive feedback in the trainings, like, oh, it's the best course we've been on, yada yada. And I think a lot of it's just because, one, they're standing up and moving around, they're moving in big space, and they're doing something kinesthetic. They're drawing. So
yeah, I agree.
I think there's opportunities to leverage the technology, but I think there's also opportunities to kind of strike a difference between working digitally and going back to analog.
I like what you say about like the ease of using it, and that you don't need to be very skilled. I mean, stick figures and houses, everyone can do that. And like even taking, instead of pens, just taking colored pencils and have people just use their hands. It creates wonders. And in office spaces where people are, I think what it brings is emotions and humanness. Where when we interact through computers and digital things, there's this kind of barrier that kind of, as you say, we get into a different position and we're not really connected to what we do. And so just going to the paper, touching the stuff with our hands, it gives us back some kind of control over what we want to say and how we want to say it. We're not constrained by the tool. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
No, makes sense. Does make sense, yeah. Koen, what do you want to say?
I was maybe it's in the context and maybe it's something different, but what I encounter a lot is they say, hey, we are a cross-country environment, so maybe to put on the table, does it still work when it's going outside the room? I mean, you can make a visual, you can share it, but the interaction thing is not there anymore when you go out the room. So
I still think that maybe a picture can represent the atmosphere, though, a little, depending on how well it's captured. But at least it can capture a little bit more emotion than maybe a document would, where you just write down, what happened.
For part of the job, visualization works in that case, but for quite part of the job, it doesn't work because it's just bringing people together, discussing based on visualization. And I'm sorry, one last thing. And every day I need to fight against the fact that they say, yeah, it's nice, but how can we share it with, for example, Mauritius? Because
I think on that, I also had this question a lot, and it's not only about the visuals, but to me, it's more about the facilitating of the event, because as you say, if it's like bringing people together, and companies decide to work in offshore, nearshore, whatever environments, we have people working remotely, but how do we bring them together? And one thing that we are starting to experiment with is, instead of having, and I'm not only talking about the visuals, but having one facilitator in one place and everyone connected through whatever connection, I think what's key is to have someone capturing, be it visually or not, on both locations or on each location. Because if it's about bringing people together, it's key that everyone gets to participate the same way.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I would also say, you know, visualization is not a silver bullet. Like, it doesn't solve all the problems. And, you know, there may be occasions where it's not even necessary. You know, I think it's a great means. I think it helps or supports finding solutions, collaborating big time. And I would also think that across different locations, I've seen great examples, you know, people who are using MG Taylor, where they have used like cameras, you know, to connect to locations, or using stuff like Andy. I know that you're using Mural, the software, a lot, or using Zoom. So I definitely think that technology helps there, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, I don't know, it can be just a camera. You can still use paper, you know, and then you take a picture, you send it over. I really think that's where the creativity is key, where you just feel like, okay, how can we leverage technology here?
I understand, but then it's still kind of presenting. Eh? It's not going into interaction, sharing the marker.
You can, but you can. I think, like, you know, there are, for example, there's whiteboard technology where you know, people can draw at the same time. And I agree. I don't think anything beats everybody being in the same room, because, you know, but that's the way that we work these days, and I think we just need to.
It's a different thing, and it's interesting, and you know, it's something that I've observed as well, not just kind of in the realm of visualization, but in facilitation in general, or working in general. So, you know, we've got all these digital tools now. I mean, collaboration online is like streets ahead of where it was a decade ago. You know, we can all collaborate simultaneously on documents and all this type of thing. And something I've observed is that whilst we've got these great tools, everyone kind of wants to work as though we're working in the old style, where we're all in the same building. So they're using the collaboration tools as though they were still in the same space. And it's actually a different skill set. And so, you know, I was talking to one of my clients around this. They use Mural as well. And I was saying, well, how are you getting on with this as well? Well, what we find is there's lots of, like, everyone who provides some kind of software, whether it be Google or Mural or, you know, any of the vast number, they've all got training on how to use their software. What they don't have is training on how do you work in this new way, where you're working asynchronously, where you're collaborating on something and then there's a gap. So it's still based around this kind of unit of work, which is a meeting where we're all together at the same time. So I think that's a challenge. And so when it comes to the facilitation stuff, this point that Koen is making around, you know, sharing this thing, sharing the marker, and how do we get that contribution? I think that it's a real challenge to say in a kind of facilitated environment, how do you create this sense of participation and involvement? And so it sounds like, Charles-Louis, you know, you're experimenting with facilitators in different locations. When we're doing online work, we'll work in a kind of hybrid way where we'll get everyone together online, we'll set a challenge, and we'll either break people up where they're in pairs or small groups online through something like Zoom breakouts, or physically, it's like turn to the people next to you, draw something, play around with something, or work on a shared, this idea of building something together, some kind of shared artifact. And I think it's that element of contribution is kind of the important thing. But I think we don't have maybe a really clear toolkit around things that we can do there yet. People are experimenting with lots of things.
Yeah,
I'm really looking for. No, sorry, just one thing, shall we? And then you can continue. I just want to say that I'm very much looking forward to a story that Danny from Australia and Jill from South Africa want to share, because they supported a group where they had the year kickoff in South Africa and in Australia, sort of at the same time, and they facilitated that together. So I'm very much looking forward to their story as well, and how they did that. Because again, it's something that's new, you know, it's not common. It's just something where we sort of need to see how can we adapt the tools that are there, just like you say, Andy, right? There is a software, you learn it, but how do you then start using it and adapting it to the new way that we work with? Shall we?
Yeah, so coming on to what you just said, I think it goes into the direction about having facilitators locally, because if you want to kick off any event with people in 2 different locations, I think so. I'm also very curious to hear about their story. What I was going to say, it was about like when we're talking about the tools, and you know, where, as you said, Andy, it's about like learning how to use the tools. I'm always reminded how at school I was taught how to use MS-DOS because it would be useful to my future life. And I think I was taught how to use MS-DOS, but it wasn't the skill sets that I needed. I think it was more about how do I work with a computer versus really, like you say, Andy, it's not just, and we've used folders and documents as a kind of naming convention for whatever's on our computers, but it's a different way of working. You know, when we're working on the cloud and so on, why do we still keep talking about folders and documents? I don't know. But I think our brains and our vocabulary also needs to make the switch. Otherwise, we will still be stuck into working the old way with the new tools. And whether it's the visuals or whatever, but we need to, I think what's key is, and it's what everyone here is saying, is how do we collaborate? How do we get people together? Because that's where the magic is.
And you know, I mean, all of us work with people. And I really have to say that that's also one of my passions, you know, working together with people, trying to create a great atmosphere, trying to solve problems, trying to move things forward. And I think the visualization part and that they sort of match really well together, because to me, it brings so much more emotion into this and fun into this. And fun doesn't mean, sometimes fun, I think maybe in business is being, you know, frowned upon in terms of like, you know, suit and tie, and, you know, it needs to be straight business and we're serious, you know, it's about results. And I think that can work together. I really, really do, because, you know, again, we're all humans. We like to enjoy what we do. I think when we enjoy what we do, we're a lot better than if we don't, if we hate our job. So bringing that peace into people's lives, and I think it's sad. I really think it's sad because, you know, Andy, just like you said, sometimes people say, oh, it was the best training, you know, they ever had. Maybe because they take off their shoes and because they sit on the floor and they draw. But to me, a huge part is really bringing that back into people's lives and kind of like creating this energy that they enjoy what they do and that they can actually change something in their day-to-day work. So this people thing and this visualization part to me sort of really connects. I don't know what you think.
So absolutely, and there's a thing where I mean, you do your best work when you're, you know, when you're feeling kind of open-hearted, open-minded, when you're engaged in what you're doing. I mean, our kind of rule of thumb is engage, make, repeat, and you just that's kind of how it goes. But for example, I mean, we did a meetup in Edinburgh a couple of weeks ago, and it was just, you know, typical kind of 90-minute introduction. So we did some bits and pieces, and it was based around storytelling, and just very simply, you know, take a character, take a setting, take a challenge, and take a magic weapon and draw those and tell a story. And so, of course, everyone had a lot of fun. But then at the, you know, kind of closing up, we're saying, well, you know, so obviously that was a lot of fun. Can you see any way that something as fun as that could be useful in a business setting? And of course, everyone was like, well, of course. But there's all these scenarios coming out. Because one of the things that allows you to do is to break out of your current frame of thinking and think about things in alternate ways. So it brings kind of fresh thinking to any subject because you're disrupting it by making it visual, by making it engaging. So yeah, makes a lot of sense to me.
What I liked, and these were examples when I started using visuals, is just, you know, that if you don't have a bullet list, people start taking, they ask like, hey, can I take the visual with me, you know, and they would never have asked if it was just a dotted, you know, like a bullet list. And to have that visual anchor, or in terms of the story, you know, once I visualized the story and it was really a coincidence, but the protagonist looked like, or the hero, looked like the person who was actually performing the job. So she said, you know what, I'm going to put that, at my desk. And so there was really an identification there that I think that was missing before. Well, not missing, but at least, you added something to it. I always believe that there's lots of tools out there that work the way that they work, or the way that they have worked before. But I feel like visualization is adding something to it. I would never question that, maybe a specific tool or method is not working, but I really believe that using visual facilitation can add to it. So you either get results quicker, you have better understanding, you can make things tangible and invite people to a discussion, rather than people think, yeah, I understood everything because what he said makes sense, but there was a misunderstanding.
And I think just to show how much a visual can add to the creativity, or to the open up another way of thinking, like Andy was saying, I'd like to show you the a visual that I made for the training that Koen and I gave earlier this week, to show people where the training was. I think so. If the sharing works,
it does.
So this is just a thing that you can do with some creativity and with some visuals, and it would be so much boring if there was just like blah 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 training, follow the arrow.
Yeah, it's true. It triggers imagination. Again.
Yeah.
What I like about pictures is that usually, people can interpret them, and then you just need to make sure that that there is sort of a common interpretation, and that's where the discussion or the dialogue is important, that you can talk about a picture.
Yeah. I'm going to stop the share so we can see who's talking.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. You know what? I mean, we don't meet that often virtually. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think we could take it on. Probably, I don't want to say forever. Forever is a very strong word.
Yes.
But let's just say for a long time. So I'd like to conclude our fireside chat. Let's just say. But is there anything? Anything else that you would like to mention before we close? Anything that you feel like has been left unsaid, and that's something that you still feel like you would like to say?
You in your preparation list, you asked us for some advice that you would starting visualizing.
Yeah, is there anything that you would like? Is there anything that you would recommend? Maybe somebody has taken a training or is eager to use it in their business. Like, what would be I don't know, a tip that you would give a starter?
What I always tell the people, don't wait for the opportunity to come, because it will never come. Just take it up and use it as of tomorrow, as of now. Because I have a lot of people that I meet after a while, and they said, yeah, I didn't get the opportunity, I didn't use it. Mm-hmm. I should have done it. But
yeah. I can really relate to that. Indeed, this is something, and I remember a training I gave earlier this month. Somebody was saying, "Yeah, it's really great, but I don't really see how I could use it." And I said, "Just use it wherever." And he said, "Yeah, maybe I'm just going to start to do it to script my role-playing sessions." And the good thing is, I know someone who has already done that for a while. Like you have met her as well, Koen, and she's been scripting her role-playing sessions forever. So I just put these two people in contact, and so they could share. I mean, she could share with that other person, like, "Hey, it's possible to use it wherever." And I think as soon as you find a way where you can use it, then everything becomes possible.
Then it's
snowball
going.
effect.
Yes.
Yeah, likewise. And I always say to people, if you can draw it, you can do it. So if you're stuck, then just draw while you're stuck. If you're making a plan, then draw it. If you've got something you want to do with other people, then draw it. In fact, whatever you're going to do, just draw it. Actually, very you're thinking about something, you draw it, and it makes visible to you where your head is at, where the gaps are, what you need to do. So
I remember at my first IFVP conference of the International Forum of Visual Practitioners there was 2016 in Washington DC, and that's mainly graphic recorders, but I think there's a huge challenge from, let's say, a training towards a graphic recording, you know, where you would say, hey, you know, I'm in front of people and I start drawing. And I quite like that they said, you know, just compare yourself to, you know, what you're doing, just compared to a white piece of paper. Because if you're not doing it, you know, nobody else is doing it. And I quite like that comparison. You know, you don't need to aim too high. It's just like, you know, start doing it and put marks on paper. Because I think the goal is not to be perfect, you know, but, you know, just start doing something and then again, learn from it and then improve, you know. So, yeah. Well, again, thank you for gathering virtually. We're all in Europe, so that's good.
Yes.
That makes it easier in terms of time zones.
Thank you.
I'm
for
looking
the
forward
wine.
to maybe, you know, maybe we can continue the conversation in September when.
What's the next subject gonna be?
So most probably, like I said, Danny and Jill are going to talk about their experience with their client, where they had the 2 kickoffs, and
Jill with a G.
Jill with a G, exactly, yeah, from Cape Town, and how they organized that, how they managed it, what they really did. So I'm really curious to hear about that. And because most of our global trainers work in different
Regions.
Different areas, not just regions, but also different areas. I mean, you know, of course, in Asia, we could, you know, maybe discuss, is
Okay.
it, do they see any difference? Is it like, is there, in terms of visual facilitation, is there something specific to Asia? But also I know that, you know, we have coaches, not coaches in the sense of agile coach or, you know, process improvement or something like that, but
individual coaches.
Exactly, individual coaching, you know, how is that being applied? And I really would like to talk about the different facets on how visual facilitation, you know, can be used. And this is not, it's not about bikablo, it's more about how do they apply what they do in their, you know, in their day-to-day job. So I think that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too.